In this video, we're going to continue with our discussion on diversification and portfolio theory. And we're going to discuss a little bit about how we can add a risk-free asset to the portfolio. Right. So now we're going to introduce, in addition to the market portfolio that we have discussed so far, a risk-free asset to the portfolio as well. And let's see what implications that has to our overall understanding of the portfolio theory. Right. Now let's assume that we can borrow and lend unlimited amounts at the risk-free rate. Let's also assume that the risk-free rate is 5%, and we note that there is no risk in the risk-free rate. It's called risk-free is because there is no risk. The return is kind of fixed, which would mean zero standard deviation in the risk-free asset. Now assume that we are saying that we can borrow and lend unlimited amounts, right? So practically, if we have money, we can invest that money. If we don't have money, we can borrow that money, right? This is the broad premise of what we are doing in this setup. Now let's see how does this work. Let's again go back to our portfolios, the list of optimal portfolios that was there. And just for argument's sake, let's say we have a portfolio that looks like this. This is not similar to the earlier portfolio that we had, but something that has a certain return and a certain risk. So this is the risk here, right, in the form of standard deviation of the portfolio. Now what we are saying is that basically this point here is a 5% level, which is where the risk-free rate lies. Now I can borrow and lend unlimited amounts at this point. So if I invest in the risk-free portfolio, all of my money that we have, we invest in this portfolio. That's where we're going to be at point A. If we invest the entire amount that we have in the market portfolio, we're possibly going to be somewhere on this line, right? We're going to be on this entire line anywhere. Also note that this is known as the efficient frontier. So this entire line here is what is known as the efficient frontier, because as discussed earlier, there is no point holding a portfolio or a combination of stocks somewhere here. That's because for every given return, for example, if this is the return we are looking at, which is, let's say, 10%, for the same 10% return, there is another portfolio. If this is a portfolio X, there is another portfolio Y, where sigma of Y is less than sigma of X, and return of Y is the same as return of X. So there is no sense in holding this portfolio. We should always be holding the portfolio Y. Right? That's the broad premise when we look at a portfolio with a certain risk reward characteristic. And hence, you would almost always hold portfolios only on this line, which is known as the efficient frontier. There's no point holding any portfolio inside of this, right? So that's the broad discussion that we have now. Now let's assume that we can raise money or we can invest money. So let's say we have $100 and we invest it in a combination of 50% into risk-free asset and 50% into the portfolio. So basically that investment has to lie somewhere in between this zone. This is where 100% is in the risk-free asset, and this is where 100% is in the portfolio. Now a combination should lie somewhere in between, right? Logically. So what do? We basically take this point where the risk-free asset lies, and we just try and draw a tangential line to the portfolio, right? Somewhere like this. Pardon the drawing. The line would look something like this, where this cuts the portfolio somewhere here on the tangential line. This point where the line from the risk-free rate goes and cuts the efficient frontier, this is a tangent, and this point is what is known as the optimal portfolio. Now let's note what happens across this line, right? If I choose to invest, let's say 50% in this portfolio, and let's call this portfolio S, and 50% in risk-free rate, then the return will be exact weighted average of these two returns somewhere here, right? But what will be the risk? What will be the risk in this portfolio? That's something that we have to define. So there are two cases that we will take. One where we have 50% in risk-free asset, 50% in portfolio. The second case is where we have more than 100% in the portfolio. Can we do that? So if we have invested 100 rupees in risk-free asset and 100 rupees in the portfolio, what's going to be the return? And how does it work if we have, let's say, 100 rupees that we borrow and we invest 200 rupees in the portfolio, right? Let's first look at the case of what is going to be the return. Just as we go ahead, it's important for us to know that this line which is being drawn here, which is the tangential line to the portfolio or efficient frontier, is known as the capital market line, right? It's a ratio between, it's a line that shows the relationship between return versus standard deviation.